Hey there, traders. Got another recap for you to cover several days. The last video we did was Thursday. So we're going to cover Friday, the 25th through today. Today is Wednesday, April 30. So I have the daily chart of the SPY up. The dashed lines are the zone that we've been talking about since last week. And there was a lot of trades in between here, but as they bounced around this zone, but they got above. And today they closed pretty healthily above, and the bulls have even pushed price higher. So what does this mean in the near term? Well, if we look at this move from, call it here, this is the most recent move down to the bottom they made back in whatever day this was, April 7. There's been a lot of back and forth. These are Fibonacci retracement levels, and they're above the 75% here. But in the bigger picture, this move here from the high way back on February 19, all these levels are still important. So now they're on their way up to the 61.8% Fibonacci retracement, as well as the 50-period moving average, on the daily chart at least, and other things. So there is overhead resistance they've got to fight, but the bulls are doing a good job pushing price back up. Today happened to be the last day of the month of April, so let's look at the monthly chart. Here is a very large tail candle or doji candle on higher than average volume. Typically, you would see a candle like this at the end of a prolonged trend in one direction, like up here, maybe from this point down here, from this point up here, where you have a certain amount of time, certain amount of, in this case, months. Then you see a signal like this, an important area, and it usually indicates a trend change. Well, they came down to a really important area. Right here is essentially the 50% from this low. I'll just go ahead and draw it. From this low here to the high they made. They came back down almost to 50%. This happened to coincide with this breakout area. So really important area. At the time, I was hoping they would go a little lower, maybe spike this 50-period moving average, this general area. Several recap videos ago. You can go back and look if you want. But anyway, they found a low and they've been up. So now they closed the month of April near where they opened. And it's above this zone, which is losing its importance as time goes on. So back to the daily chart, what's going to happen? Well, they need to get above a lot of moving averages and some other areas. There's gaps to fill. There's retracement levels. There's a lot of things above current price that are going to provide overhead resistance that the bulls are going to have a hard time fighting through. Maybe they're not going to have a hard time fighting through, but it's not going to be it's not necessarily going to be easy. They have battles in front of them. And don't forget, currently where they're at least where they closed, is below the 50 period. By definition, that's bearish. Weekly chart, still bearish. And we looked at the monthly chart already. They went way below the 20 period, never got to the 50 period. They're back up. So by definition, the monthly chart's bullish. Weekly chart is bearish. Daily chart still bearish. But if they get above the 50-period moving average and they start fighting other areas of overhead resistance, then the SPY could finally find itself back into a bullish position. Currently, they're on the precipice. So the first game plan we're going to look at is Friday, because the last video was on Thursday last week. So this is Friday, April 25. You can see the levels and the game plan. You can read through that. Pause the video if you need to read through the game plan for the day. From here, we'll go back to Friday and look at the price action and the levels that were hit and what happened if you were playing by the rules. And we'll look at recordings of trades that I took for days that I was available to trade since last Friday. Here's a chart of the price action on Friday, April 25. Between the vertical lines is the entire day for Friday. So these two levels were hit, 547.43 and 549.70. And what happened? Well, after 9:45 a.m., after 15 minutes, price was below this level, and they came back up into it again, and that was a base hit when they fell down again. So this was trade number one for at least 4 points, but obviously a lot more if you were willing to hold on for more points. And then they got up to 549.70. And if you were strictly playing by the rules and not looking for any other reason why price might pull back from this general area, you would have reversed at the exact wrong time, given away 13 points on the reversal. And as they fell, you would have hit your maximum loss limit of 20 points, so another 7 points, if that makes sense. The point is, this one trade, after I got 20 points out of the money, that would have been closed out at a max loss limit. And they came back down into 547.43. This time you can take a trade on the long side, and that was one more base hit as they bounced from that area. So those were the trades for Friday, April 25. So for Monday, April 28, Here is a screenshot of all the levels that were sent out. I don't have a game plan because starting on Monday, April 28th, I did not email the levels and the game plan out. Instead, they were accessible via the subscription, the daily level subscription at ticksandtrades.com. And I did not take a screenshot or record that. I just typed in the game plan into that post. And when I overwrote that on Tuesday, it went away. So I don't have a copy of Monday's game plan. So here are the levels, and we'll go to the chart and look at what happened on Monday. So here is Monday, April 28th, between the vertical lines as the price action throughout the day. Well, let me point out first that this trend line here, this lighter blue line that's kind of upsloping here, was not on the board on Monday. In fact, what they did here, and it found a high and pulled back, created the trend line. That was a pivot high. When it used in conjunction with a previous pivot high, created a trend line, which came into play later, like the next day, like Tuesday and Wednesday. But anyway, we're talking about Monday. So we had these levels. These 4 levels, or at least 3 levels were hit. This one down here at 544.96 came up close. But if you were playing by the rules, here's what would have happened. After giving the market 15 minutes to settle in, they were up here, 945 above this level. They came back down, going long at 552.73, expecting them to bounce and go higher because the bulls should have been in charge at this point. Did not work. And as they fell, you would have hit your max loss limit of 20 points right before they came into 550.64. If you bought there and gave that some time per the rules to develop, you would have been rewarded with a base hit as they went up from that area. They played around with this area, fell down into 546.64. However, that was a wash because of a near miss of the profit objective right here. If you held on to this, you would have been given a base hit, but per the rules, you would have jumped out at a wash because they almost gave a base hit of 4 points in the E-minis, and then they came back down to the entry point and went lower. And as far as you know at this point, they're going to keep going lower, so jumping out at the entry point was the plan, and then they're back up to 550.64. And there's just enough time at this point left in the regular session to go short at this level because you have not gone short yet. And they pulled down enough for a 4-point base hit a few minutes later. So that was Monday. For Tuesday, April 29, here were the levels and the game plan, and you can read through this. And we'll go back to the chart in a minute to talk about what happened with those levels. Again, I'll scroll up so you can see all the levels. Now, there's a trend line you'll see on the chart that wasn't here. Just want to point out that trend line came into play after the fact. Here it is. Here's April 29. That was yesterday, Tuesday. So ignore this trend line. It was not on the board on Tuesday morning, but these 3 levels that you see in the blue lines were on the board. How did Tuesday work out playing by the rules? It was actually a pretty good day. There were 20 points total at 945. They were right below 550.29. So if you bought at 550, you would have bought again at 551, and your average price between those 2 levels would have given you a base hit pretty easily. It went higher. They came back down into 550.29 again, and just enough time had passed by the time they got away from this level, and they came back down into it again. So taking a recycle trade was an option. That's a base hit. That's another base hit. And then when they got above 551.37 for an extended period of time, here it was good for another recycle trade. They bounced there again. So no trades until they got all the way up to 555.40. And as you can see, that was a precise level. They pulled away for more than a base hit. Once again, this trend line was not on the board for Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, April 30, which is today, here are the daily levels and the game plan that were available before the opening bell. So you can read through that, and then we'll jump to the chart and look at Wednesday's activity. Everything after the vertical dashed line, and here were the 3 levels and 1 trend line that came into play, and it was another good day. So here's what happened. 543.70 was the first level to hit. So after 945, where were they? They were under this level, so you would have gone short at 543.70 or 543.65 if you chose to add that 5-cent buffer, which is usually a good idea. They pulled down, and there's your first base hit. They got up to 547.42. They hit it cleanly, pulled back. There's base hit number 2. It went up to 548.91, base hit number 3, right there. Now they came back down to 547.42. How low did they get? 547.41, spiked about 1 penny and bounced off. That's base hit number 4. And so at this point, these levels have been traded on the long side and the short side, or at least the bottom level has. 547.42. They got above 548.91, came back down, but did not get close enough. So this is not a trade. So 4 base hits. I just want to point something out. They got up to this trend line. Now, it's too late to take a trade. It's 3:54 p.m. Eastern. I'm not going to take a trade after 3:30, but they went right up to this trend line, messed around with it, and check this out. Take a look at the aftermarket hours. This is the 24-hour session. They messed around with this trend line. They went above where they go. They went right up to 559.68. That was a level we had on the board. They did not hit this until way after the closing bell, but just to point out that these levels are important, and they work the majority of the time. But anyway, for Wednesday, that's 16 S&P points. And now we'll look at the trades that I took starting Friday through today. Well, today I didn't trade at all, so there's no recording. But on Friday, Monday, and Tuesday, I have recordings to look at. So here is Friday, April 25. Notice the time and the date. Market just opened. They're off to the races. So the trade that I took looks like it's seemingly in the middle of nowhere, but I bought 2 contracts at a place that I identified in real time that seemed to be like a place they would bounce from. They did. I took one off, handful of points, trailed the remaining contract up for a few more points, and that's what I got on Friday, and that was all I did. And I think this recording went for the rest of the day. There you go. Well, maybe till 2 o'clock or so. So no more trades for me. That was all I did in the morning for Friday. So here is Monday, April 28. Notice the time, 9:31. Market open. They're off to the races. So if you recall, price got above 552.73 and it was 9:45. So 15 minutes had elapsed and they were coming back down into it. So I bought, or actually bought a little bit lower. I let them come underneath the level. I bought 4 contracts. You can see that right here. Not sure what I was thinking. And they quickly came down to the next level. I bought 2 more. So at this point, I'm long 6 and I'm in the hole quite a bit. So I gave them some time, try to find other reasons why this could be good support, and maybe they were going to rally. But the bears were looking more and more like they were in control. So at some point, when I was around 21 points or so in the hole, I jumped out, took a pretty big loss. So that happened on their way down in this neighborhood here. Let's just give it a minute or so. You'll see this disappear. Yeah, right there. That's when I jumped out, and that's the only thing I did that day. Well, let me back up. So this area was should have been good support, so I was willing to buy or scale in as if they came down to this general zone here, but they never got low enough. So unfortunately, I missed this. They kind of came up short, and at that point, I decided, well, I will just let things just lie the way they were. Not going to put any more money at risk. So took a big loss, took a beating on Monday. That was my trade, and now we'll look at Tuesday. So Tuesday was interesting. Notice the time, 6:51 a.m. before the market opened. This is all pre-market stuff. They were coming down into 550.29, kind of looking at what they were doing. I was already in this trade. I bought when they were below this or kind of this general area. 2 contracts and quickly pulled 5.5 points. This is not sped up a whole lot, so let me just scrub ahead here. And all this happened, well before the opening bell. So I started out the day pretty good. Got a few points, and then this jumps to the regular session. I combined the recordings right here. Let me just back up a little bit. There you go. It'll just jump ahead here. So notice the time is 9:35, 9:36, whatever. So the market's open. This is a regular session here. And you can see my trades. I'm short at this level. I'm short again when they got to the next level. This is part of the zone here, which is by the rules, pretty much. Came back down. I took 3 of the contracts off of that 4 contract position and tried to trail the remaining contract down, but just got stopped out. But it was a fair amount of points. I think that's all I did. Yeah, that's all I did. So I had that pre-market trade and then that trade later in the day or in that morning. And I let this go until the end of the open session. So that was Tuesday. And there was no recording of any trades on Wednesday. So by 10 o'clock in the morning, I was in meetings until after lunch. So pretty busy, no time to trade, and there was no recording to watch. But we can look at the logs. The first one is the playing by the rules log. You can read through the notes. It says Friday through Wednesday, the 25th through the 30th of April. We had a couple bad days, but we had a couple good days as well. And overall, we're still gaining. So notice the various metrics and the rate of return so far this year. It's still climbing. And then the Sam's trades, same thing. You can read the note. You saw the recordings of the trades that I was able to take. Even with this pretty big loss, the rate of return this year so far is not too shabby. So that does it for the month of April. Sorry, I did not get this recap out earlier. Been pretty busy. It's kind of ironic. As soon as I got the course and the subscription, everything live, ready to go, and pushed it out, I got very busy at work with several projects being dumped on my plate. I've just been busy lately, and that's kind of why these recap videos are not happening daily. I want to do them daily. That's my goal. I just need to work around my schedule a little bit to allow the time to do it, because I know it's more valuable to have these daily recaps, at least I think they are, than to do them every other day or maybe weekly. But I have to admit, there's something in the back of my mind that wants to do something like a weekly recap, like Friday or over the weekend, like a weekly recap during the weekend, just capture the entire week. But looking at it every single day does help me, in fact, because it kind of forces me to think about the next day, where we're at in current time, where we might be the next day or the next 2 days or so. But in any case, I hope that these last few recaps between last Friday and today, Wednesday, April 30, were helpful. And if you found them helpful, thanks for liking the video and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Hopefully sooner than later, I will get into the swing of things and start churning out these daily recaps on a more consistent basis. But thanks again for watching. I appreciate the support. I will be back Thursday, that's tomorrow, May 1st, for another recap, new levels, another game plan, and we'll do it all over again. Have a great day. I will talk to you again soon.